My name is Chloe Miller, and I am 29 years old. The day I came home, the garage was empty. No car, no shine, no sound, just the hollow echo of betrayal. "Mom," I asked, my voice trembling, "where's my Corvette?" She smiled faintly, almost proud. "Your sister needed help," she said. "We sold your car. Family comes first." I remember standing there, my suitcase still in my hand, my heart pounding in my ears. They had sold the one thing I'd spent years building my life around, and they didn't even flinch. What they didn't know was that selling my car didn't just cost them my trust. It cost them their peace. But before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe and drop a comment to let me know where you are watching from. My first love wasn't a person, it was a machine. It didn't have a heartbeat, but it had a soul I could hear in the deep, rumbling idle of a V8 engine. It started when I was 6. Every Sunday, my grandpa would pick me up in his old Ford pickup. The cab smelled like sawdust and motor oil, a scent that meant safety to me. We wouldn't go to the park or the movies. We would go to classic car shows held in dusty parking lots of shopping malls that were closed for the day. While other kids were on swings, I was walking down rows of polished chrome and gleaming paint. Grandpa was a quiet man, but when he talked about cars, his eyes lit up. He'd point at the shiny hoods and whisper, "Every car has a soul, kiddo. You just have to listen." So I listened. I heard the aggressive growl of a Mustang and the steady purr of a Bel Air. I saw the stories in the dings and scratches on unrestored models and the pride in the flawless finish of the ones that were cherished. Other girls my age were playing with dolls, dressing them in pink clothes. I was falling in love with steel, glass, and gasoline. The day I saw it for the first time, it felt like the world stopped. It was a 1969 Corvette Stingray, painted a brilliant rally red that seemed to pull the sunlight right out of the sky. It had sharp, aggressive lines, like a shark cutting through water, and chrome edges that shined so bright they hurt my eyes. It wasn't just beautiful. It was powerful. It looked like it was moving even when it was standing still. I walked around it, my small hand hovering over the paint, too scared to touch something so perfect. I peered inside at the black leather seats and the simple, clean dashboard. I tugged on my grandpa's sleeve. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He knelt beside me, his creased face breaking into a wide smile. "That, Chloe, is a piece of American history. That's a Corvette Stingray, the best of the best. Right there, in that sun-baked parking lot, with the smell of hot dogs and exhaust fumes in the air, I made a promise to myself. It was a silent, serious promise that only a child can make. I would own one someday. It wouldn't be a gift. It wouldn't be a loan. It would be mine. I told my grandpa my plan. He didn't laugh or tell me it was a silly dream for a little girl. He just looked at me, his expression serious, and nodded. "Then work for it," he said, his voice firm but kind. "Save your money. Learn everything you can. Nothing hits harder, and nothing feels better than what you earn yourself." He was the only person in my family who ever spoke to me that way. He didn't see me as a girl who needed protecting. He saw me as a person who could build things. He bought me model car kits for my birthdays instead of dolls. He taught me how to change the oil in his truck when I was 10, my small hand struggling with the wrench. He explained what a carburetor was, how pistons fired, and why the sound of an engine was like music if you knew how to listen. His lessons weren't just about cars. They were about life. When I got a bad grade, he didn't coddle me. He'd say, "So what's the plan? How are you going to fix it?" When I wanted a new bike, he helped me find neighbors who needed their lawns mowed. He taught me that problems weren't walls. They were just puzzles waiting to be solved. And he taught me that self-pity was the heaviest and most useless thing a person could carry. When he passed away from a heart attack when I was 15, it felt like the world had lost its engine. The silence he left behind was deafening. My family mourned him, of course, but for me, I had lost my anchor. I had lost the one person who saw me for who I was. At his funeral, my uncle handed me a small, greasy toolbox. "He wanted you to have this," he said. Inside were Grandpa's favorite wrenches and screwdrivers. Tucked in a side pocket was a faded photograph of him standing proudly next to a red Corvette at a car show years ago. It was the one I saw when I was 6. I knew then that my dream wasn't just a dream anymore. It was a promise to him. Owning that car would be my way of saying, I listened. I learned. I did it myself, just like you told me to. The Corvette wasn't just a car. It was his legacy, and it was going to be my future. Growing up, I learned that love in our house wasn't equal. It was conditional. It was a resource, and it was allocated almost entirely to my older sister, Haley. Our family was a small solar system, and Haley was the sun. My parents, and by extension me, were just planets caught in her orbit. Haley was the gentle one. That's what they called her. She was pretty, with soft blonde hair and big blue eyes that could fill with tears at a moment's notice. She was fragile, emotional, and, according to our parents, in constant need of protection and support. If she wanted something, she got it. If she was upset, the whole house stopped until she was smiling again. I was the strong one. I was the one who was so independent and so resilient. These weren't compliments. They were excuses. They were reasons to look away, to not offer help, to assume I was fine. I learned to be strong because I had no other choice. The difference was in the small things, the everyday moments that build a childhood. When Haley was 8, she wanted to be a ballerina. My parents spent thousands on lessons, point shoes, and frilly tutus. She quit after 6 months because it was too hard. No one said a word. When I was 8, I wanted to join a junior mechanics club. My dad laughed and said, "Chloe, you'll get grease all over your clothes." My mom suggested I try something nicer, like pottery. I saved up my allowance for months to pay the entry fee myself. When Haley scraped her knee, my mother would rush over, armed with cartoon-themed bandages and kisses to make it better. The one time I fell out of a tree and broke my arm, I walked home by myself, cradling it against my chest. When my mom saw me, her first words were, "Oh, honestly, Chloe, what were you thinking climbing so high?" In the emergency room, she spent most of the time on the phone, assuring Haley that everything was okay and that she wouldn't miss her dance recital. I sat there, my arm throbbing in a temporary cast, and understood that even my pain was an inconvenience. It wasn't that they were cruel people. They weren't monsters. In their minds, they were being fair. They were giving each of us what we needed. Haley needed constant support. I apparently needed nothing. When she cried, she got hugs. When I cried, I was told, "You'll figure it out, Chloe. You always do." So I stopped crying in front of them. My emotions became private, things to be dealt with alone in my room, just like my homework and my dreams. This didn't make me bitter. It made me disciplined. It carved out a space inside me that was mine and mine alone. While Haley was being handed things, I was learning how to earn them. While she was being praised for her sensitivity, I was developing strength. High school was a masterclass in this dynamic. Haley was a cheerleader, popular and effortlessly social. Her grades were average, but my parents were proud of her people skills. I was in the library during lunch studying. I got straight A's, joined the math team, and got a part-time job at a local garage, sweeping floors and learning from the old mechanics. My report cards were met with a simple, "That's nice, dear." Haley's homecoming queen nomination got a party. The day our college acceptance letters came was the clearest example. Haley was rejected from her top choices and was devastated. My parents spent the evening comforting her, brainstorming other options, telling her it was the college's loss. They ordered her favorite takeout and rented her favorite movie. My letter came in the same mail delivery. I had gotten a full academic scholarship to the University of Illinois for their engineering program. When I showed my parents, my dad glanced at it and said, "Well, that's great, honey. At least we only have to worry about one tuition now." My success wasn't a reason to celebrate. It was a solution to a financial problem. I watched Haley get a brand new car for her graduation so she could drive to the local community college. It was a practical car, a safe car, a gift. I took the bus to my job all summer to save up for a beat-up old Honda with a rusted-out fender and 150,000 miles. I spent a week in the driveway with my grandpa's tools, fixing it myself. My parents didn't offer to help, not with money or with labor. They just told me to make sure I didn't leave an oil stain on the concrete. That hunger, the hunger to be seen, to be valued, to build something for myself that no one could dismiss, became my drive. It was the fuel in my engine. They thought they were raising one fragile daughter and one strong one. What they were actually doing was training one to be dependent and forcing the other to become powerful. They had no idea the machine they were building. College was my escape. For the first time, I was judged on my work, not on my role in the family. I threw myself into my studies. While other students were at parties, I was in the library or the engineering lab. I lived on cheap coffee and instant noodles. I didn't see it as a sacrifice. I saw it as an investment. Every late night, every textbook I read until the words blurred, was a brick in the foundation of the life I was building for myself. A life where I didn't need anyone's approval. After I graduated at the top of my class, I took a demanding job at a high-powered financial firm in Chicago. The work was brutal. It wasn't engineering, but it paid exceptionally well, and I knew that money was the fastest tool to get me to my goal. The hours were soul-crushing, 70 a week, sometimes more. I was at my desk before the sun came up and often left long after it had set. My social life was non-existent. My apartment was a small, sterile box in a nondescript building far from the trendy parts of the city. It was just a place to sleep for a few hours before I went back to the office, but I didn't complain. I had a picture of the 1969 Rally Red Corvette taped to my computer monitor. It was my North Star. On the days when my eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets and my brain felt numb from endless calculations, I would look at that picture. I would hear my grandpa's voice in my head. Nothing hits harder than what you earn yourself. I became a ghost in my own life. I packed lunches every single day, usually leftovers from a simple dinner I'd cooked the night before. I brewed my coffee at home and carried it in a thermos. I skipped happy hours with colleagues, turned down invitations for weekend trips, and wore the same simple professional clothes until they were worn out. Every penny I saved went into a separate bank account, one I nicknamed the Stingray Fund. For 5 years, that was my life. A cycle of work, sleep, and save. My parents would call sometimes. The conversations were always the same. "How's work, honey?" my mom would ask. "It's busy, but it's good," I'd say. Then the conversation would pivot. "That's nice. You know, your sister is having a hard time with her new apartment. The rent is just so high. We had to help her out a little this month." Haley had drifted through 3 different jobs since college, never staying anywhere for more than a year. She lived in a trendy downtown apartment my parents subsidized. She took yoga classes, went on expensive brunch dates, and complained about being broke. I would listen on the phone, a quiet anger simmering in my chest. And then I would transfer another $100 into the Stingray Fund. Her neediness was a constant reminder of why I needed to be independent. Finally, after 5 years of relentless saving, the number in my bank account was where it needed to be. I started searching. It became my new obsession. Every night, after a 12-hour workday, I would scour the internet, looking at classic car forums, auction sites, and private seller listings. I wanted the perfect one, a restored 1969 Stingray, Rally Red, with the original engine if possible. After months of searching, I found it. It was listed by an old man in a small town in Wisconsin who had spent a decade restoring it in his garage. The pictures were stunning. The car was perfect. My heart pounded as I dialed his number. The price was $85,000. It was every dollar I had saved. Every vacation I'd skipped, every cheap meal I'd eaten, every lonely night I'd spent working. It was all there, in that number. I didn't hesitate. The next Saturday, I took a train to Wisconsin and a taxi to the old man's house. There it was, sitting in his driveway, gleaming under the afternoon sun. It was more beautiful than any picture. It was real. I walked around it, my hand shaking as I touched the hood. It was cool and smooth. When the owner turned the key, the engine roared to life with a deep, throaty rumble that vibrated right through my bones. It was the sound of my childhood, the sound of my grandpa, the sound of victory. I signed the papers, transferred the money, and he handed me the keys. My hands trembled as I slid into the driver's seat. The smell of old leather and gasoline filled my senses. I gripped the thin wooden steering wheel. This was real. I had done it. The drive home to Chicago was the best drive of my life. I rolled the windows down, letting the wind whip through my hair. The engine purred like memory itself. I was no longer the invisible daughter, the girl who was told to figure it out. I was a woman who had built her own dream from nothing. As I merged onto the highway, the setting sun glinting off the long red hood, I looked at the empty passenger seat and whispered to the open air, "Grandpa, we did it." Bringing the Corvette home was like bringing a piece of my soul into the world. It was my prize, my therapy, my connection to my grandpa. I treated it with the same care a mother would give a newborn child. I kept it in a secure, climate-controlled garage I rented near my apartment. I washed it by hand every weekend and spent hours polishing the chrome until it gleamed. It wasn't just a car for driving. It was a piece of art. My art. A few months after I bought the car, I got the best news of my career. My firm was sending me to our London office for a month to lead a critical client transition. It was a huge opportunity, a major step toward a promotion I had been working tirelessly for. I was thrilled, but one immediate nagging thought soured the excitement. What about the car? The garage I rented had strict rules against leaving a vehicle untouched for 30 days. Leaving it on the street in Chicago was absolutely out of the question. My mind immediately went to the one place that should have been the safest in the world, my parents' house in the suburbs. They had a big, empty two-car garage. I called them, my stomach twisting with a familiar sense of anxiety. I hated asking them for anything. "That's so exciting, Chloe! London!" my mom said, her voice bright. "Thanks, Mom. Listen, I have a big favor to ask. I can't leave my car here for a month. Would it be okay if I stored it in your garage while I'm gone?" There was a brief pause. "Your car? The old red one?" she asked. "Yes, the Corvette. It would be completely out of the way. I'd just park it on one side and you'd still have plenty of room." My dad got on the extension. "Of course, sweetheart. No problem at all. It'll be safe here. We'll take good care of it." His words were meant to be reassuring, but a small knot of dread tightened in my gut. I tried to push it down. They wouldn't. They couldn't. They knew what this car meant to me. I had told them the story about Grandpa. I had shown them the bank statements, explaining the 5 years of sacrifice. They had to understand. The weekend before my flight, I drove the Corvette out to their house. I pulled into their driveway, the engine's low rumble announcing my arrival. My dad came out to help me position it perfectly in the corner of the garage, leaving plenty of space. I handed him the keys. "There are a few important things," I said, my voice serious, making sure I had his full attention. "You need to start it once a week and let it run for about 10 minutes, just to keep the battery charged and the engine fluids circulated. But please do not drive it, and please don't let anyone else touch it. It's not a normal car." He nodded, a bit dismissively, as if I were being overly dramatic. "Got it, Chloe. Start it, don't drive it." "It'll be our little secret." I felt a little better, he had promised. That afternoon, just as I was about to call a taxi to take me back to the city, Haley's car pulled up. She got out, looking frustrated, her phone pressed to her ear. She was complaining loudly to a friend. When she saw me, she ended the call and walked over, a pout already forming on her lips. "I can't believe it," she whined, dropping her purse on the kitchen counter. "Everyone is going on this amazing trip to Bali next month, and I can't afford it. It's so unfair." I had heard this story 100 times before. She was always on the verge of a financial crisis, usually caused by her own spending habits. I tried to be patient. "You just started a new job 2 months ago, Haley. That's great. Maybe you could save up for a trip next year." She rolled her eyes, the way she always did when I offered practical advice. "You wouldn't understand, Chloe. You have your big, fancy job and all that money. You can just do whatever you want." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. She saw my life as easy, a collection of things I could just do. She had no concept of the trade-offs, the discipline, the sheer exhaustion that had paid for my life. To her, my success was just luck, while her struggles were cosmic injustices. "It's not about just doing whatever I want, Haley," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "It's about making choices. I chose to work and save. You chose to spend." She let out a frustrated sigh. "See? This is why I can't talk to you. You're always judging me." She stormed off to find Mom, probably to get the sympathy I had failed to provide. I stood there in the kitchen, a sense of foreboding washing over me. Haley's pout, my dad's easy promise, my mom's dismissiveness. It all felt like a storm gathering just over the horizon. If only I had listened to that feeling. If only I had known that Haley's desire for a vacation and my parents' inability to ever say no to her were about to collide with the one thing I had ever truly loved. If only I'd known what "you wouldn't understand" really meant. The flight home from London was long. 20 straight hours of recycled air and the low drone of jet engines. I was exhausted, but it was a good kind of tired. The project had been a massive success. I had performed better than anyone expected, and my boss had all but promised me a promotion upon my return. I had spent a month navigating a new city, leading a team, and proving to myself once again that I could handle whatever was thrown at me. As the plane descended over the familiar grid of Chicago's lights, a single thought pushed through the jet lag. I get to drive my car. The thought was a jolt of pure joy. I imagined sliding into the driver's seat, the smell of the old leather, the feeling of the wooden steering wheel in my hands. I could already hear the satisfying roar of the engine turning over. That car wasn't just a machine. It was the physical manifestation of my hard work. Driving it was my reward. After a taxi ride that felt like it took an eternity, I finally got to my parents' house. It was late, and the lights were off except for a dim lamp in the living room. I let myself in with the key they'd given me, dragging my heavy suitcase behind me. The house was silent. I dropped my bags in the entryway, too excited to even take them to my old room. The first thing I needed to do, the only thing that mattered, was to see my car. I flicked on the light switch for the garage. The fluorescent bulbs hummed for a second before casting a cold, sterile light over the concrete floor. My heart stopped. Then it started again, pounding a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. The garage was empty. Not just my car is gone empty. It was cavernously empty. Dad's lawnmower was pushed against one wall, and a few dusty gardening tools hung on the other. But the space where my beautiful, gleaming, rally red Corvette should have been was a hollow void. It was a missing tooth in the smile of my homecoming. For a moment, I tried to reason with my panic. Maybe Dad moved it. Maybe it's in the driveway. Maybe he took it to a mechanic for a tune-up as a surprise. I fumbled for the button to open the main garage door, my hands shaking. The door groaned as it lifted, revealing the dark, empty driveway. No car. I ran back inside, my chest tight, a cold dread spreading through me like ice in my veins. "Mom, Dad?" I yelled, my voice cracking. Lights flicked on upstairs. I heard footsteps. Then my dad appeared at the top of the stairs, pulling on a bathrobe. "Chloe, what's wrong?" "You're home late." "The car," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Where's my car?" My mom appeared behind him, her face soft with sleep. They walked down the stairs slowly, as if they had all the time in the world. They exchanged a look. It wasn't a look of confusion. It was a look of something else. A shared secret. A decision made. That single glance told me everything I needed to know before they even opened their mouths. My dad cleared his throat. He couldn't meet my eyes. He looked at the floor, at the wall, at a spot over my shoulder. "Honey, your sister needed help." The words didn't make sense. It was like he was speaking a foreign language. Help with what? What did Haley have to do with my car? My mom stepped forward, her expression calm, almost placid. It was the same look she'd given me when I'd broken my arm. Not of concern, but of weary justification. Her voice was soft, but the words were as sharp as broken glass. "We sold it for her Bali trip. You know how much she wanted to go." I stared at her, certain I had misheard. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen suddenly seemed deafening. My own breathing sounded loud and ragged in my ears. "You, what?" "We sold it," she repeated, a little firmer this time, as if saying it again would make it more reasonable. "Haley was so upset, Chloe. Her friends were all going, and she was going to be left out. We couldn't let that happen." I felt the floor tilt beneath my feet. Sold it. The words echoed in the silent house. They had taken my dream, the thing I had poured 5 years of my life into, and they had liquidated it for a 2-week vacation. For Haley's feelings? "You had no right," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of shock and rage. "That was my car. I earned that car. I trusted you." My dad finally looked at me, his expression pleading. "We were going to tell you when you got back. We were going to figure out a way to pay you back. Eventually," but my mom cut him off. She took another step toward me, her tone shifting from justification to a strange kind of admonishment, as if I were the one being unreasonable. "Chloe, don't be so dramatic. It's just a thing. You make such good money now. You'll be fine. You can just buy another one." That was it. That was the moment everything broke. "It's just a thing. You'll be fine." The same words, the same sentiment, they had used my entire life. My strength, my success, my independence, they weren't things to be proud of. They were a license for my family to neglect me, to take from me, to dismiss my feelings because they assumed I could handle it. My pain was an inconvenience. My achievements were simply a resource for them to tap into for Haley's benefit. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. I looked at their faces. My father, unable to meet my gaze, ashamed but weak. My mother, looking at me with righteous certainty, fully believing she had done the right thing for her gentle daughter. They had done it. They had sold the only thing I truly loved. The one thing that was completely and totally mine. Family comes first. Chloe, Mom added softly, as if this were the final, irrefutable argument that would make me understand. That's when the shaking stopped. The hot rage in my chest cooled into something hard and heavy, like a block of ice. The grief and the shock receded, replaced by a sudden, chilling clarity. They thought they had sold my car. They thought they had taken my dream and turned it into cash for a tropical holiday. They thought the worst was over, that all they had to endure was a little bit of my anger before I got over it, like I always did. I looked from my mother's confident face to my father's guilty one. A slow, cold smile spread across my lips. It wasn't a smile of peace or forgiveness. It was a smile of absolute, terrifying certainty. I let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "You have no idea what you've done," I whispered. They stared at me, confused by my smile. My mother's brow furrowed. She expected tears, shouting, a dramatic scene. She didn't expect the eerie calm that had settled over me. She didn't understand that the pain of their betrayal had burned away in an instant, replaced by the cold, clear logic of consequence. They thought this was a family drama. They were about to find out it was a criminal matter. I turned without another word, picked up my suitcase, and walked past them toward the stairs. "Chloe, where are you going?" My dad called after me, his voice laced with panic. "We need to talk about this." "We have nothing to talk about," I said over my shoulder, not breaking my stride. "I just need to make a phone call." In the sterile quiet of my childhood bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out my phone. My hands were perfectly steady. I scrolled through my contacts and found the name Ethan, my boyfriend, the owner of the car they had just sold. As the phone rang, my mind flashed back to the night before I left for London. It was a memory so clear it felt like it was happening all over again. Ethan and I were in my garage, the one I rented in the city. My Corvette was parked under the lights, its red paint looking like liquid fire. Ethan was leaning against his own car, parked in the adjacent spot. His car was also a 1969 Corvette Stingray, also rally red. To a casual observer, they were twins, but they were not the same. Mine was a numbers-matching original, meticulously restored with factory-correct parts, an investment piece worth a small fortune. His was a replica, a brilliant one to be sure. He had built it himself with his father, using the body of a less valuable 1972 model and fitting it with the chrome bumpers and side gills to perfectly mimic the iconic 69. It had a powerful modern engine and a beautiful finish, but to a collector it was worth maybe a fifth of what mine was. It was a car for fun, for driving without fear. "I'm still not sure about this, Chloe," he had said, gesturing toward my car. "Leaving it with your parents? After everything you've told me about them and your sister?" Ethan was a pragmatist. He was a mechanical engineer who saw the world as a series of systems. Emotion was a variable he accounted for, but he always trusted logic more. He had listened to my stories about my family with a quiet, analytical sympathy. He didn't understand the complex web of guilt and obligation I felt. He just saw an unbalanced equation. "They'll be fine," I had insisted, trying to convince myself as much as him. I gave them strict instructions. Dad promised. Ethan had just shaken his head, a small cynical smile on his face. "Promises are just data points, Chloe, and the data you've given me on your family suggests a high probability of system failure." He pushed himself off his car and walked toward mine. He ran a hand gently over the fender. "This car is your life's work. I'm not letting you leave it in an unsecured location. It's their garage. It's perfectly secure," I argued. "I'm not talking about theft," he said, looking me straight in the eye. "I'm talking about Haley. What happens when she needs money for a new handbag or a weekend trip to Napa? Your mom and dad have never said no to her. What makes you think they'll start now, with an $85,000 asset sitting right in front of them?" His words sent a chill down my spine because I knew he was right. I knew it in my gut. That little knot of dread I'd felt was my intuition telling me the same thing. "So what am I supposed to do?" I asked, my voice weak. That's when he laid out his plan. It was simple, logical, and brilliant. "We swap them," he said. "I'll take yours to my storage unit. It's climate-controlled, video-monitored, Fort Knox. You take my replica to your parents' house. They look identical. Your parents won't know the difference. No one will. If I'm wrong, you come back in a month, we swap them back, and no one is the wiser. If I'm right, he trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. At the time, it felt like a betrayal of my own family to even consider it. It felt sneaky and distrustful. But the fear of losing my car, my real car, was stronger. So we did it. That night, under the cover of darkness, we drove the two cars to a quiet, empty parking lot and swapped the license plates. I drove his beautiful, powerful, but ultimately replaceable replica to my parents' house the next day. I parked it in their garage and gave my father the keys to a car that was not mine. The whole time, a sick feeling of guilt warred with a sense of profound relief. The phone clicked in my ear, pulling me back to the present. Ethan's voice, calm and steady, came through the line. "Chloe, is everything okay?" "You're back." I took a deep breath. "Ethan," I said, my voice as level as his. "You were right." There was a pause on the other end. "Oh," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of grim confirmation. "They did it, didn't they?" "They sold it," I said. "For Haley?" "For a trip to Bali." I heard him exhale slowly. He wasn't angry. He was something far more dangerous, methodical. "Okay," he said. "Did they tell you for how much?" "No," I replied. "Find out. And find out who they sold it to. Get a name. Then sit tight. Don't talk to them. Don't argue with them. I'll be there in the morning. We'll handle this. What are you going to do?" I asked. "Chloe," he said, and his voice was cold steel. "They didn't just betray your trust. They stole my property, and they almost certainly forged my signature on the title to do it. This isn't a family problem anymore. It's a felony." I hung up the phone. I finally understood the smile that had been on my face downstairs. It wasn't about revenge. It was about the perfect, undeniable clarity of the situation. My parents had made a choice. They had chosen Haley's fleeting happiness over my life's work. They had gambled, thinking I was the only one who would have to pay the price. But they had sold the wrong car. They hadn't stolen from me. The daughter they knew would figure it out. They had stolen from Ethan. And unlike me, Ethan didn't believe in letting family slide. He believed in systems. And the system they had just entered was the justice system. I spent the night in my old room, the door locked. I didn't sleep. I just sat on the bed, listening to the sounds of the house. I could hear my parents' muffled whispers downstairs. I could hear them walking back and forth. I heard the phone ring once. I assumed they were calling Haley, probably telling her I was overreacting. They were trying to figure out how to manage me, how to smooth this over the way they always did. They were operating under the old rules where my feelings were the only obstacle. They had no idea that the rules had changed and that a storm was heading directly for them. The next morning, I went downstairs. My mother was in the kitchen making coffee, her face strained. She had rehearsed a speech. I could see it in her eyes. "Chloe, honey," she began, her voice artificially sweet. "Your father and I talked, and we know you're upset. We are so sorry. We should have asked you. But we can fix this. We'll set up a payment plan. Every month we'll—" The doorbell rang, cutting her off. I walked past her to answer it. Ethan was standing on the doorstep. He wasn't dressed for a fight. He was wearing a simple jacket, jeans, and a calm, unreadable expression on his face. He looked like he was here to fix a leaky faucet, not to dismantle a family. "Ethan," I said, stepping aside to let him in. My parents froze when they saw him. My dad came out of the living room, a newspaper in his hand. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice wavering. "Good morning, Mark, Carol," Ethan said politely. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." My mother's face went blank with confusion. I don't understand." "The car," Ethan said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "The 1969 Corvette you had in your garage? You sold it. The problem is it wasn't Chloe's car. It was mine. She was just storing it here for me." The color drained from my mother's face. My dad dropped his newspaper. It hit the floor with a soft thud that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. "What? What are you talking about?" Dad stammered. "That was Chloe's car." "No," Ethan corrected him gently. "Chloe's car is safe in a storage facility. The car you sold was my car, registered in my name. The title was in my name." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Which brings me to my next question. How exactly did you sell a vehicle you didn't own? The DMV is usually quite particular about the owner being present to sign the title." My dad went pale. He looked at my mom, who looked like she was about to faint. The truth of what they had done was finally dawning on them, and it was far more terrifying than my anger. They hadn't just made a terrible mistake. They had committed a crime. A series of them. It was an emergency, my mom whispered, her voice trembling. For Haley, that isn't a legal defense, Ethan said coolly. He pulled a small notebook and a pen from his jacket pocket. I'm going to need the name and contact information of the person you sold it to, and the exact amount you sold it for. Now, wait a minute, my dad said, trying to regain some semblance of authority, his voice blustering. This is a family matter. We can sort this out without getting what, Mark? Ethan asked, his gaze sharp. Lawyers? The police? Because what you've done here is called grand theft auto. That's a Class 2 felony in Illinois, and since you sold it, that adds fraud and likely forgery to the list. Forgery of a vehicle title is a Class 4 felony. We're talking about potentially 10 years or more in prison. For both of you. Mom burst into tears, a loud, gulping sob of pure terror. This wasn't the kind of problem she could fix with a comforting speech. This wasn't about hurt feelings. This was about jail. We didn't know, she cried, looking at me, her eyes pleading. Chloe, tell him. We thought it was your car. We would never... Tell him. This was the moment. The moment they turned to me, the strong one. The one who always figured things out to fix the mess they had made. They had created a catastrophe to please my sister, and now they expected me to protect them from the consequences. I just stood there. I didn't say a word. I just watched them, my face a mask of stone. I remembered every single time they had dismissed my pain. Every time they had told me to handle my own problems. Every time they had chosen her over me. I remembered my broken arm, my college acceptance letter, the 5 years I had spent sacrificing everything for a dream they had sold for pocket money. Chloe, please, my father begged, his voice cracking. He'll listen to you. We made a mistake. A terrible mistake. We'll pay you back. We'll pay him back. Just fix this. And in his desperation, he revealed the ugly truth. They still didn't get it. They didn't see me as a daughter they had wronged. They saw me as a tool, a function, the family fixer. There's nothing to fix, Dad, I said, my voice quiet but firm. You broke the law. Ethan is the victim here. This is between you and him. Ethan, who had been waiting patiently, clicked his pen. The buyer's information? Please. Defeated, my father mumbled a name. A man named Jim Peterson. And a price, $50,000. They had sold an $85,000 car, or what they thought was one, for a quick cash deal. They were not only thieves, they were incompetent ones. Just then the back door opened and Haley walked in, holding a smoothie. Hey, I heard Chloe was back. Did you survive the... She stopped short, seeing the scene in the kitchen. Mom crying, Dad looking like a ghost, and Ethan standing there like an executioner. What's going on? Your parents stole my car to pay for your vacation, Haley, Ethan said without a trace of accusation in his voice. It was just a fact. And now they might be going to prison for it. Haley's smoothie slipped from her hand, splattering across the pristine kitchen floor in a sickening pink mess. Her face, for the first time in her life, was a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. The Bali trip didn't seem so important anymore. The days that followed were a blur of strained silence and quiet panic. My parents moved around the house like ghosts, speaking only in hushed, terrified whispers. Haley called me a dozen times a day, alternating between tearful apologies and desperate pleas for me to do something. I didn't answer. I stayed at a hotel in the city, letting the consequences of their actions settle over the suburban home that had once been my own. This wasn't my mess to clean up. For the first time in my life, I was letting them figure it out. Ethan, true to his nature, handled everything with chilling efficiency. He contacted the buyer, Jim Peterson, a retired mechanic who was thrilled with his purchase but was an honest man. When Ethan explained the situation, that the car was stolen property and the sale was fraudulent, Mr. Peterson was surprisingly understanding. He had suspected the price was too good to be true. He agreed to return the car in exchange for a full refund of his $50,000. He just wanted his money back and no trouble. The trouble, therefore, landed squarely back on my parents. A week later, we all met in a sterile, intimidating conference room at a lawyer's office downtown. It wasn't my lawyer. It was Ethan's. I was there merely as a witness, a silent observer to the proceedings. My parents sat on one side of the polished mahogany table, looking small and old. Haley sat between them, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. Ethan and I sat on the other side. He was the picture of calm control. I was a statue. Ethan's lawyer, a sharp woman named Ms. Davies, laid out the terms of the settlement Ethan was willing to offer. It was, she explained, an act of extreme generosity, as it would keep them out of the criminal justice system. "Mr. Miller and Mrs. Miller," she began, her voice crisp and professional, "you have committed several serious felonies. My client, Mr. Knight," she gestured to Ethan, "is the sole victim of these crimes and is therefore in a position to dictate the terms of a private settlement. Should you agree to these terms, he will decline to press charges." My dad nodded numbly, his hands trembling where they rested on the table. "The terms are as follows," Ms. Davies continued, reading from a document. "First, you will repay the full $50,000 to Mr. Peterson immediately to reclaim the vehicle. Second, you will pay my client $10,000 in damages for the unauthorized use of his property, the fraudulent sale, and the legal fees incurred. Third, and this is non-negotiable, you will both sign this document." She slid a paper across the table. It was a notarized confession. It detailed everything they had done, knowingly taking property that wasn't theirs, forging the title, and selling it under false pretenses. "This confession will be held by my office," she explained. "If you default on any part of the payment agreement, or if any incident like this ever occurs again, this document will be filed with the district attorney's office, and criminal proceedings will begin immediately. Do you understand?" My mother let out a small, choked sob. $60,000. It was an astronomical sum for them. They didn't have it. Their comfortable suburban life was built on a modest pension and a fixed income, not a mountain of cash. The next few weeks were the dismantling of their lives. They had to pull every penny from their savings, draining the account they had carefully built for their retirement. It wasn't enough. My dad had to take out a high-interest loan against his pension, sacrificing a significant chunk of his future financial security. Still not enough. The final piece came from my mother. I was at the house one afternoon to pick up my remaining mail when I saw her in her bedroom, a small velvet-lined box open on her bed. She was taking out her jewelry, her mother's pearl necklace, the diamond earrings my dad had bought her for their 25th anniversary, the gold bracelets she wore on special occasions. Each piece was a memory, a symbol of the safe, comfortable life she had cherished. She was putting them into a bag to take to a jeweler to be sold for their raw value. Her hands were shaking. And then there was Haley. The $5,000 she had gotten for the car, the money she had set aside for her Bali trip, was the first to go into the pot. She had to call her friends and tell them she wasn't coming. She had to listen to their disappointed replies, knowing she had brought all of this on herself and on our parents. The day they handed over the cashier's check to Ethan's lawyer was gray and cold. My parents looked defeated. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow, brittle shame. As we were leaving the office, my mother stopped me in the hallway. "We were just trying to help your sister," she said softly, her voice thick with unshed tears. It wasn't an excuse anymore. It was a plea for understanding, for some kind of absolution. I looked at her, at the woman who had always seen me as secondary, as a supporting character in Haley's story. I felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a profound sadness for the damage they had done to us all. I nodded. "And I'm just helping you understand consequences," I replied. There was no hug, no comforting words. I just turned and walked away. The power dynamic in our family had been irrevocably broken and then rebuilt on a foundation of cold, hard truth. Their love had been conditional. My silence was now absolute. Months later, the world looked different. The loud, dramatic explosion of the reckoning had settled into a quiet, dusty aftermath. The changes weren't sudden or cinematic. They were slow, subtle shifts in the landscape of our family. Haley, for the first time in her life, was forced to stand on her own 2 feet. With our parents' financial safety net gone, she couldn't afford her trendy apartment anymore. She moved into a tiny studio in a less fashionable part of town and got a second job, waitressing on weekends. I would sometimes hear from mutual acquaintances that she was tired, that she complained about working so much. But she didn't quit. She paid her own bills. The fragility that my parents had so carefully cultivated in her was being burned away by necessity, replaced by a resilience she never knew she had. She was becoming strong, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. My dad started trying to rebuild a bridge. It wasn't with grand gestures or expensive gifts. Those days were over. It was with small things. He would send me texts, just asking how my day was. He started reading articles about the finance industry, trying to understand my world. He was using words, not money, to show he cared. It was awkward and clumsy, but it was a start. He was trying to see me, Chloe, not just the strong one. My mother was a different story. The silence from her was the loudest. Our relationship was fractured, perhaps irreparably. The loss of her financial security was a constant, bitter reminder of her mistake. But more than that, I think she was mourning the loss of the family structure she had built, the one where she was the protector of her gentle daughter, where her love could solve any problem. She had learned a lesson, but it had cost her the one thing she had always taken for granted: my respect. One bright Saturday afternoon in the fall, I drove my real Corvette out of its secure storage unit. Ethan and I had picked it up the day after he got his replica back. It was just as perfect as I remembered. I spent the morning washing and waxing it until the rally red paint was so deep it looked like you could dive into it. Then I just drove. I didn't have a destination. I just wanted to feel the engine rumble, to feel the power under my control. I found myself on the familiar roads leading to my parents' suburb. I wasn't going there for a confrontation or to gloat. It was more like a final pilgrimage, a closing of a chapter. As I drove down their street, I saw my mom in the front yard, raking leaves. She heard the engine first, that distinctive, throaty purr. She looked up and her eyes locked on the car. She froze, the rake held loosely in her hands. She saw it, gleaming, powerful, and undeniably mine. It was the car she had tried to take, the dream she had tried to sell. And here it was, perfectly fine, with me behind the wheel. I saw the complex mix of emotions on her face: shame, regret, maybe even a little bit of awe. She cried. I could see her shoulders shake with the silent sobs. I didn't honk. I didn't wave. I didn't even smile. I just kept my eyes on the road ahead and drove past. I pushed my foot down on the accelerator and the Corvette surged forward, the sound of the engine like quiet forgiveness. Not for them, but for myself. Forgiveness for ever believing I needed their approval to be whole. Some things you can rebuild. A savings account, a bit of trust, a fractured conversation. Some things you can't. The easy, unconditional love a child should have for a parent was gone, and we could never get it back. And sometimes peace isn't about reconciliation. Sometimes it's about acceptance. Sometimes peace sounds like a Corvette engine roaring away from people who finally learned that not everything in your life belongs to them, especially your strength.